Hi, this is Dave Michels from UCStrategies with a bunch of UCStrategies experts with me. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the channel in unified communications. We often talk about the technology and how it's shifting, but the ramifications and implications to the channel are pretty significant as well. The channel we use loosely to describe things like the distributor networks, the reseller networks. Some people will include consultants in the term channel because of their key influence capabilities. Also, we use the term system integrators, and they're all, at a bit of this metamorphosis with the unified communications as the technology changes. And I thought we would talk a little bit about the challenge that they're experiencing. One big issue is the disappearance of hardware. Between soft phones and software-based systems, there's a lot less hardware to move around, which has significant implications for traditional distributors, and of course the traditional dealer model, which used to be largely based on a local model where they had inventory and service trucks. And all of that is flattening out. The world is flat, as they say, and VoIP is even flatter. So that has big implications about who is the channel. Is it somebody down the street, or is it somebody across the country, or potentially somebody around the world? We're also looking at the emergence of the hosted space. Everything from hosted VoIP to services like Skype have significant implications around the channel, particularly since an organization with lots of offices around the country may have had lots of different channel reps. Now they might be using one hosted provider or service like Skype for all of their sites. And these services have different kind of maturities in their channel programs. For example, Skype doesn't have a very attractive commission to a lot of traditional channel players. We've also got the issue of the vendors themselves, channel sales versus direct sales. A lot of the larger organizations expect to deal with the vendors directly, but most of the manufacturers don't offer any kind of implementation support and are pushing that toward the channel. So lots of issues going on here, and I thought we would kick it off with Jim. Do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dave. Well, having followed the channel for many, many years through the evolution of many technologies, history is somewhat repeating itself. There's a couple of things that I think are important to note. One is the channel is always following the technology, meaning that the vendors come out with new products and services, and it takes channel partners a little while to catch up with that because they're not interested in serving bleeding-edge products and technologies. They want there to actually be a market for it before they jump into it. We have been seeing that in the UC space. In fact, at the Microsoft Partner Conference a couple of months ago, I noted that a number of the vendors said that they thought they would be better off if the channel had been a little more aggressive, that they actually could be selling more than they are today, but they're dependent on the channel's being a little bit slow. The channel, though, today is faced with some real serious problems, and it's an obstacle that they have to overcome, and they will overcome. They have in the past at least overcome. They're changing, as you pointed out, Dave, from a hardware model to a software model, and their business needs to be changing to reflect that. If you go back into history, as the channel of voice vendors and data vendors or channel partners started converging a little bit, you saw that all of a sudden the interconnect, as we call them, the voice VARs, they had a different business model than the data VARs. And quite frankly, it's the data VAR model that is winning out for a bunch of obvious reasons. They're not giving opportunities to make money on the hardware like they used to, so they have to do it in services. There's great opportunity, by the way, in selling in services, but it's just a little bit different model than what they're used to. And then if you add into that cloud services, you really start seeing challenges in the distribution model from where a reseller that was selling hardware would make an upfront sell and make lots of money for the services and the components that went into that to a cloud solution. And in that cloud solution, it's a recurring revenue over a period of time. So their financial business model changes from big upfront lumps of money to that same amount of money spread over time. And that's hard for a business model to change. If you're in the services business and you have an opportunity to sign somebody up for a hosted service, in some ways that actually becomes incremental. And it also, I think, brings up another point when people start talking about some of these new services, to understand that there is always the need for hardware. you need some bandwidth distribution and you need voice I/O of some kind within an organization. So there's always a need for some kind of hardware, but those big chunks of iron that we used to sell called PBXs, it's software running on a server these days. So I really expect the channel to step to the table and to be very successful. They've got a lot to go through. They've got a lot of learning to do. They can use a lot of help, and that's one place that UCStrategies is going to be focusing on, as we have in the past, of working with the channel to help them get educated about the opportunities and the challenges in front of them. Art, you have always got a lot of wonderful ideas, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I don't have ideas. I try to do step one is, before we talk about solutions, what's the problem? And let's look at what some of the problems that you sort of introduced for the channels, because it's not enough to say, here's the solution, here's a box, or even here's a software suite, because what we're seeing with UC is that the requirements for UC are not for everybody in an organization. Everything is different for the individual end users and end user groups, and it makes no difference whether they're on-premise or they're working from home or they're mobile. It's all of the above, so there's a lot of flexibility required, and it has to be drilled down to something that we've always been talking about. Is UC is its main purpose is not for making it easy for users to communicate with other users, but it's number one from a business perspective to improve and optimize the business process, which is not only person-to-person communications. So things like CEBP, Communication-Enabled Business Processing, becomes very important. Which applications are we talking about are going to have high value, high payoff, and who are the people involved with them, and what are their needs? And once you identify that, then you can do some implementation, but not the other way around where we'll buy everything for everybody and let's figure it out later. So there's a challenge in terms of defining the real operational requirements, how it's going to be implemented, because sometimes you don't really want to own the thing. You just want to try it out. And so hosted technologies become very important just to find out what you're trying to do, it works. And things like CEBP, we're getting into applications, especially mobile apps. This is not just communications, it's what's the application, the call flow, if you will, or the workflow. And you don't want to be connecting things, you just want to know who needs to be involved with what information and how are they going to get it. And last but not least is going to be what you mentioned is, who's going to be selling what to the end user organization, the customer, as opposed to the individual end users. Because individual end users aren't going to buy anything except what they want for themselves. If they're working with a company, with a business, the business is going to dictate, this is what I need for my end users. Those are within the organization, those that are going to be my customers, and these are going to be my business partners. And who's going to make that all work together and be integrated in a smooth, non-violent, and efficient way. So the challenge is going to be who's going to be doing what when it comes to the channels, and how are they going to get there, and what are the developers, the providers, the vendors, if you will, what is their role in contributing to that in terms of compensating, making it interesting, as Jim, you pointed out, for the vendors to say, hey, it's worthwhile for me to get on a subscription basis, and because the people that I work with, that I know, that are in my territory or whatever, or my business model, they're the ones I can support.
This is Marty Parker, and I'd like to talk about the disruptive nature of unified communications from the VAR and system integrators' perspective. System integrators must always be very careful about each vendor's intentions and motivations, since the vendor's goals may not be aligned with the long-term health of the systems integrator. Specifically, the IP PBX vendors desperately wanted to maintain their revenues and momentum in the transition from traditional PBXs. So the entire emphasis was on making the IP PBX look like a safe but cheaper replacement for the PBX sold to the same buyers. So in most cases, UC functionality was just bundled into the PBX license structure. Whole families of new and disruptive technologies, including instant messaging, presence, collaborative workspaces, social software, application development software tools, and cellular network calling, were treated as just added features to a PBX, not as seriously disruptive solutions that would marginalize or replace the PBX over time. Only 3 or maybe 5 major companies did not have that specific view and were willing to have new disruptive technologies. Microsoft, Cisco, and IBM are the top 3, and maybe Skype and Google. Microsoft seeks to convert PBX spending into an entirely different form of communications sold mostly to different buyers. Cisco wanted to grab market share from the traditional PBXs and so needed to look somewhat different. Also, Cisco could sell in part to a different buyer, the infrastructure manager. IBM, however, was fine with the PBX and really wanted to add communication and collaboration to their strengths in business process automation, collaboration software, and portals, delivered mostly by their own internal professional services organization. Based on those views, Microsoft and Cisco spent heavily on developing new channel capabilities with programs for new VAR and system integrator skills development, new applications approaches and justifications, startup and application funding, and lots of marketing reinforcement, including serious unified communication, not IPPBX, case studies. The results are pretty clear. Microsoft and Cisco are the going-away leaders in the Gartner Unified Communications Magic Quadrant. So my bottom line message for VARs and systems integrators right now is to really evaluate the option of just milking the replacement of PBXs with IPPBXs versus the option of really embracing the disruptive solutions, as several of my peers have already suggested. If that feels too risky, then consider starting another division of your company, maybe even with a different brand, or even starting a new parallel company in the pure UC, collaboration, and business social application spaces. Even there, beware of the vendors who are just branding their products as collaboration or social. We've seen a rash of that in the past year. Really look for the new and disruptive solutions. Don't be afraid of integration. That's a skill the customers will pay for, just as they did with Genesis Labs in the call center market in the 1990s. And Genesis Labs went on to be the call center leader by the early 2000s. Remember, integrator is part of the name systems integrator. Also, if you find some great applications, don't hesitate to package them and sell them to every company within that vertical or horizontal need set. Now, if this makes sense to you, then stay tuned here at UCStrategies.com. We are committed to the creative work of building these new disruptive markets, not to the goal of once more migrating all of the PBXs on the planet. Thanks.
This is Steve. Excellent points. I have a couple of thoughts on my end as well. So, number one, within the last 10 years, the entire channel has gone through some tremendous disruption. For example, the legacy voice vendors, VARs, now had to learn data skill sets. So we still experience on the enterprise level with our customers, some of the VARs that we deal with just do not have good data skill sets, and so there's a learning curve there, so they had to learn that. The voice over IP model in general doesn't require truck roll. Jim, as you had mentioned a little bit earlier, and Dave, it's not the traditional model anymore. In fact, most of the manufacturers claim, and most of the VARs claim, that most of the troubleshooting, up to 90%, can be resolved remotely. That's a huge paradigm shift in the industry from truck roll, that I can solve your problem now in the cloud, if you will, or from the NOC center, from the VAR, or from the manufacturer. You'd mentioned software-based models. Absolutely. And everything has now been pushed towards a licensing-based model versus hardware. So, again, there's less hardware going out to the field. Another significant change has been in the voice-over IP world. Geez, I don't have to pay for move and change activity any longer with the local VAR. So all of that revenue that they have seen over the years, in some cases, has even gone to close to zero line item, depending upon how they've been able to adjust. And, of course, you've got the dynamic of the cloud, to Art's point, and how is that going to change with a hosted model? And to Jim's point earlier, I think the solution here for the manufacturers and the ones that are originating this is that they have to look at some kind of ongoing compensation model so that the channel can eventually adapt to all of this disruption. And finally, you do have several vendors out there, ShoreTel, Avaya, Siemens, Cisco, just to name a few, that really want to push themselves towards a channelized model. So there's a lot of disruption going on. The manufacturer-based direct sales model is slowly moving away towards a channel sales model, and yet all of this disruption going on based on this new technology or technology that's been around for a short time, is changing. And then my last point, I know I said final, but my last point here is that the other thing the VARs really need to be looking at and the channel needs to be looking at is how do I adapt to these new technologies. So in the UC space specifically, the IM chat functions, the presence, all of the software-based UC functions, you need to develop a professional services skill set in order to adapt and use that as a core competency, which you've always been able to do dial tone, Mr. VAR. You've always been able to do voicemail and all the basics, cabling, et cetera. But now you've got all these new skill sets in the software-based model. So, but the one key I think really that all of the channel has, and it's way above any manufacturer or anyone else that does not have, and that is that they have the customer relationship, and there is a significant dollar value to that relationship. So somehow, through all of this disruption, we value the channel, and we have to let the manufacturers figure out how are we going to compensate the channel to maintain that relationship with the customer.
Steve, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions because I know that you're active as your primary business as a consultant. As the traditional dealer moves away from inventory and more into selling their expertise or the SI model, come to us to help you implement. Do you see a blurring between what we would normally call system integrators or dealers and consultants? I know, for example, you're a member of the Society of Telecom Consultants,
Sure.
which doesn't allow any type of reselling arrangements at all.
Correct.
So my question is, do you see that the consultants moving more toward reselling acceptance, and more of the resellers moving more toward consulting? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, at least in my space, Dave, we're strictly independent consultants, and I know that when we get engaged by enterprise clients, they are actively seeking or have very high interest in using someone who's independent, who doesn't have any specific ties to any one VAR. So do I see a disruption in the market in that space? I think there's always going to be a need for an independent consultant. I think, though, what's going to happen is that as this cross-border happens between integrators and VARs, I think that will definitely merge. I think VARs, in order to offer value, and the channel wants to offer value, I think the VARs are going to have to create additional professional services skill sets. So is there potentially some overlap between consultants and professional services? Yeah, at least in the highly specialized areas, I would think. But I think there's always a role for an independent consultant through a needs assessment, through a procurement process, through project management skill sets that will represent the customer side for sure, David.
Dave, I just saw a recent study done by the Brookside Group on telecom consulting growth drivers for 2011-12. I don't know if you've seen it. They surveyed all the people they consider as telecom consultants, whatever label you want to put on them, and the big number one driver for their business is 1, unified communications, 2, collaborative technologies, 3, mobile applications. Number 5 shows as cloud computing is giving them business, and number 7 is the contact center area. And I think number 9 is virtual networks. But the point is that everybody's now hovering around unified communications for business communications in general. So telephony is only a part of that and never will be separate anymore.
Right. Agreed, Art.
Excellent. Russell, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts on this?
Picking up on what Art and Steve were just saying, I think an important part of the channel for UC are the implementers and deployers. This is a completely new skill set, and very few, if any, customers have these skills in-house, and so their tendency is going to be to outsource the deployment of UC to a systems integrator. If we think back in the technology business to the Y2K era, there were systems integrators who were making tons of money on rolling out SAP and other Y2K-related business systems. I think that scale of business is going to be there for these guys in deployment of UC. If you think about the major UC deployments that have happened to date, particularly in oil and gas, you've got hundreds of thousands of employees being rolled onto UC systems, in many different countries and many different sites, some of them in geographically challenging sites like offshore oil rigs and so on. And this all takes just a ton of work. It's a multi-million-dollar project. So the skills in deploying and managing and architecting these UC systems, integrating them with the existing systems and with the CBP that Art already mentioned, there is just a ton of business there. Problem is that there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem because the SIs don't have the skills either. So they've got to try and figure it out as they go along. And a lot of them are not that willing to make investments up front. They want the business to be there before they'll make the investments. That's a chicken and egg conundrum. But, a significant part of the channel play for UC is going to be deployment and even dedicated hosting. I know that Shell outsourced the entire project to AT&T. AT&T runs Shell's UC network for them. So these are all opportunities. These are all, some degree of challenge, but a significant part of the future of the UC network is the deployment.
I just wanted to add a comment because definitely, we were in agreement as to the role of the SIs and especially for things like CBP. But now we're getting to a level not just of individual end users and what they personally prefer or want, but now we're getting to the individual business processes, and each one of those requires some analytics as to make the process more effective and more efficient and for whom, and then you can bring in how the UC capabilities will be integrated. But again, chicken and egg. What are you going to do first? Are you going to start, well, I've got the communications part. Well, what are the applications? I don't know. Obviously, I think there's going to be the need for someone to go in and say, let's look at our business processes, the way we've been doing it, and how we might want to do it, and start evolving there. And the question is, whose skills can help them do it? Because no one has the experience, period, especially when it has to be customized.
Both of you bring up a really interesting point because the skill shortage is a big problem in the distribution or channel network. And it's not a problem that can easily be solved by the vendors because so many of the solutions are multi-vendor solutions and require a broader focus than a single vendor can provide. And I think that's an interesting change that's impacting distribution. I've seen a lot of the distributors are focusing much more around training and education than they had in the past. I know that I get a lot of these emails from ScanSource, for example, that are pushing education, which, I didn't think of a distributor as so focused on that 10 years ago. The distributors were much more focused on moving product 10 years ago. Don Van Doren, I know that you've got an opinion on this as well. What do you have to say, Don?
Hi, Dave. Thanks very much. Yeah, I guess I just would emphasize some of the points that Steve and Art have just been making, especially with respect to this issue about what's the overlap between the SIs and the VARs and the independent consultants. One of the things that's interesting, of course, is that as the vendors are broadening their unified communications capabilities, one of the things that happens, of course, is that they're all getting into each other's turf. What that means, of course, is that the VARs or the SIs that represent one of those particular vendors, all of a sudden there's potential at least for a company to have relationships with several VARs, both of which could be offering some UC solutions. That's one of the ways that, frankly, independent consultants still have a very important role to play, is just to help to sort that sort of thing out. I know that Marty and I get involved in those kinds of projects continuously because people do want that independence, as Steve mentioned before.
Very good. Does anyone else have any wrap-up comments to make?
Hello, this is Jason Andersson calling in from Europe. I think the discussion around channels is really important, and the new skills that they require is rather vast if you look at it from the whole perspective. First of all, they need a much more closer relationship with the vendors that they represent, which is what we see here in the Nordics and in Europe. The vendors tend to limit the number of vendors that they represent, so the channels become more narrower in terms of who they represent. At the same time, on the other end, the customers are requesting them to become almost like a consultant, telling the customer where to go or advising them where to go based on the vendor that they've chosen or the strategic direction that they've chosen. Now, this requires, like you talked about before, a much better IT know-how than they have today, and also a much closer relationship on the business side. So the channels are changing from pure technology advices and technology delivering to a business relationship, talking to the business owners more than the IT departments. In addition to traditional IT skills and IT know-how, they also need integration skills. Now, UC is much more than just showing presence and having a soft phone on your PC. It very much is about tying unified communication features into a business process perspective, and that requires integration skills. And with the new types of devices coming in such as tablets and things, where you can show a lot more information than you can on a fixed line or even a mobile phone, you want to integrate much more to get more information in the hands of the users. Looking at from a mobile perspective, now the Nordics has a very high penetration of mobile devices in the enterprise, and mobile UC is high up on the must-have list of most companies here. And then you get into the issue of mobile device management, of understanding security on mobile devices, and all of that area is extremely important together with the integration skills. And of course, you have some new skills on top of this that is required, and demands that are coming very strongly and very quickly. And cloud is one of them that you mentioned before. And other than that, you have new devices, and with new devices comes new opportunities. And of course, you can have a mobile device or a tablet or something similar to that, where you have a SIP client, or even UC apps. And if you tie these to the cloud with security issues and firewall issues and all of these different things, you get a very complex situation that requires new skills for the channel representatives. And on top of that, a lot of the new mobility features are going to use enterprise-based wireless Wi-Fi solutions and even 3G data solutions for more wider roaming. And that is also a different skill than they used to. In Europe, DECT is still very prevalent in many offices and enterprises. And this is being changed over to somewhat to SIP-DECT, but also to Wi-Fi solutions and 3G data solutions. So there are a lot of new skills and a lot of channels and challenges for the channels in terms of changing the relationship they have with the vendors, changing the relationship they have with their customers, and at the same time building up a know-how, limiting the number of vendors they represent, at the same time as they get these new skills such as mobile device management and cloud security type of computing issues. Those are some things that I see from where the channel needs to go in the next year, or maybe even shorter than that. All right, thanks. That's all for me.
Hello, this is David Yedwab, and I'd like to add some comments to my colleagues' thoughts regarding channels. It's also obvious to me that UC solutions are likely to continue to be multi-vendor for many reasons going forward. From the channel perspective, that's likely to require the channels to decide whether they need to become certified by more and more vendors, which is a lengthy, time-consuming time, or to find a way to partner with each other for both provisioning solutions and supporting solutions. Which of the partners is going to be the lead? Which pieces of provisioning, support, sales, etc. will each of the partners do, and how will the dollars be divided? Several of the vendors are just beginning to wrestle with the support offers in a multi-vendor environment, and more work needs to be done because customers won't buy if they're not comfortable that the solution will work and that it can be fixed when it doesn't.
The last comment I would want to make, obviously, is especially when it comes to the integration issues. We don't have all the standards in place, unfortunately, And I think that's going to be a big handicap in being able to move forward in a seamless way and for people to be cooperative, a coopetition, if you will, because it's all going to be software based, not so much hardware. And the question is, are there going to be standards to ensure that the software, because software is going to constantly change. It's not fixed and you're done like hardware. Hey, we're not going to make it anymore, or it's going to be good for a couple of years. It's going to be constantly changing as the need requires. And so the question is, how are those standards going to come about? Because they're not here yet. They're not good enough.
Very good. Well, with that, we'll wrap up this podcast. Thank you all experts for participating, and we'll be back in about a week.